Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Morning, friends. I got a text from Jennifer Mandel, who's one of the counselors on our team, maybe a few hours ago. And Jennifer said to me, she said, "How's it going?" Jennifer is out in Texas visiting colleges right now. So she's visited McCombs, which is the business school at UT Austin. She's visiting Rice. And I said, it's fantastic. I'm up in the clouds, and I'm going to be up in the clouds for a while, I told her. And why? Our new website, our new YouTube page, our new Instagram. And you're going to hear more about that a little bit in the middle of today's episode. And then I told her, I'm very excited because you guys know I like gardening. So we had this landscape consultant we met with like 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And our house looks out, it's all woods behind us. And he's like, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have a deer problem. I'm like, well, I haven't had a deer problem. And we've been living here for 14 years. At the time, it was 14, now it's 17. He's like, I can tell you, you're going to have a deer problem. He's like, they absolutely love wooded areas like your area. And he said, with all the houses that are going down around here, where do you think they're going to go? Well, dude was right. All of a sudden, deer were coming. I mean, big deer. And they were tearing up all my hard work out there. The roses, the hydrangeas. So just broke down, tapped the emergency fund, put a big giant fence, 234 wood fence. And you know what? I did my research. How high can a deer jump? Well, he said some deer can clear 8 feet. So I said, I'm not taking any chances. I'm not going to spend all this money and have a deer in my yard. 9.5 foot deer fence. So I'm loving the garden. I was out there this morning with our new fence, but I'm really excited about today. Let's talk about today's episode. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play a message a listener sent in, which I greatly appreciated. It's a tribute to one of our co-hosts, and it's a co-host who greatly deserves being recognized. Then I'm going to play a question from another listener who has a few ideas about the SAT, ways for schools to have some quality control with testing. I wanted to know my thoughts on that. So I fly solo on that and I give an answer there. And then you're going to hear a little bit more about our YouTube channel, our new website, and our new Instagram. And then we have part 2 of 3 with Jed Applerouth. You guys sent in about 5 or 6 questions. And I think maybe in today's episode, he answers 2 or 3 of them on the ACT or the SAT. But without any further ado, let's transition to this message about one of our co-hosts.
Hi, Mark. It's Emily from Ohio. Just had to give you some quick feedback about how much I love Carter. He is such a joy in the addition of hosts. I meant to give feedback a couple weeks ago when he was talking to a question from a listener. It was a young mom about what her kids should do in high school. And he talked really a lot about mental health, and he was so sweet and thoughtful. And now I just finished listening to the Spiky podcast question. And again, he just has this wisdom and soft delivery. I looked him up on your website, and he's so young. I'm amazed at how much wisdom he has, and he's so young. He's just a great, great addition. So if you want to just pass that on to him, I'm just very thankful that he's joined your team. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Friends, I just want to say something about Carter. That is so well deserved. And Carter's not as young as he looks. Like, go back and look at the year he graduated from college. But he's definitely a wise soul. And, Vince and I were recording the other day, and he's like, man, that Carter, he's just got so much wisdom. We have this text message group amongst our co-hosts. We kind of blow each other's phones up all day. We break news and seek opinions, and we have a lot of fun in there as well. And Carter's kind of like the wise sage in the group. So everything that you said about Carter is so true. He may be the youngest in there, or he's maybe tied with a couple people, but he is maybe the wisest, certainly up there. So well said and well appreciated. All right, let's transition to our question from a listener.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hey, Mark, it's Barbara from Akala. Hope you're well. I'm all over your website. It's so exciting. And I am playing YouTube videos, which are even more exciting. So congrats on all of that. I was listening to the interview today with Jed, and I had a thought, and I'm curious about your thoughts and Jed's. What do you think about the idea of the SAT-2 coming back? I know it's probably not a possibility, but I was just thinking, like, why did we ever get rid of it? Also, I'm wondering, can you see a situation where colleges would begin to say, okay, if you've taken an AP course, you have to submit your AP exam scores, and maybe those scores could help give information that they're not getting just off of a transcript? Anyway, I'm just curious to hear your opinion on those two ideas. And again, congrats on the new site and on the YouTube. What you're doing is beyond what anybody else in this field is doing, and we are all so grateful. Have a great day.
First of all, let me start, Barbara, by just thanking you. You're always so encouraging, so supportive, and it's listeners like you that are the wind beneath our wings that keep us keeping on. So let me first start by saying that. But let me just get right to the upshot. I don't see either of the suggestions that you had, and I appreciate how your mind is always kind of trying to come up with creative solutions. I just don't see any of those two solutions being saleable on a broad scale basis. Now, the reality is I don't see anything really being adopted broad scale. And if you think about it, it's somewhat understandable, right? With over 2,200 four-year bachelor granting not-for-profit schools, look how they function so independently when it comes to how they evaluate a file or what they require from a student. So in the admission process, in the way of documents, whether it's interviews or essays or not essays or tests, we could go on and on, all the different requirements that some schools have that others don't have. So it's really kind of in keeping with higher ed, how it operates, that there really wouldn't be any one standard approach that everybody would take. It just reminds me of the independence that all the schools utilize right now. I just think there's always going to be different approaches that are going to be in this space. So, for example, we have test-free schools, score-free, test-blind, pick your term. We have test-optional schools. We have test-required schools. We have test-recommended schools right now. And then we have things like no-harm test policies. And you heard Jed Applerouth in the last interview. He likes no-harm test policies. I think there's room for more creativity in this space. You look at what Caltech's done. There's creativity in this space. You look at what Tufts is doing. There's creativity in the space. And I like my idea. And someone like Jed, who's got a PhD in this stuff, who's in the test prep world, he liked my idea. For those of you who missed last week, what I'd like to see colleges do is do your own research, find out what score correlates with success in your program. And by the way, it's going to be a lot lower than these averages, okay? You can look at some sports where athletes have lower testing. Remember, there's some sports where athletes have higher testing or even similar testing to the student body at large. But in some sports where athletes have higher testing, and you can still see some high graduation rates with support at certain schools. So I can assure you the score that a student is going to need to be successful is going to be significantly lower than their means and medians right now. But I'd like to see schools put that research in, establish that score, have it be an honor code situation, similar to like when you self-report tests, right? When you self-report your test scores on the Common App, it's an honor system. And then later, once you're in a row, then you send your officials in. Well, why can't a school say, let's say their research says students under 1,200 don't do well here. So why can't you make it a mandatory box? You need to check, did you get a 1,200 on the test? And if it's yes or no, you don't show your score. And then afterward, colleges can get that score. They can do some research. What I like about that is accommodates the concerns that some students are being admitted who can't do the program. So it can put some basic testing in place. It's based on the school's individual research, but that it avoids my big concern with testing, which is numbers do voodoo on the brain, and they lead to such an implicit bias that many kids who could do the work and who would be great additions to the school are not going to be admitted, either because of the bias of the test or because the boards that admission officers have to report to are going to want to see higher numbers. So it's going to put a political pressure on the admission office to have to admit kids with certain scores, not because they don't think the kid can do the program, but because they're being pressured because it's being used as an indice of the quality of the admissions office. To me, you get your cake and eat it too. You don't have a no standards policy, but you don't have the bias of testing, which I'm going to go back to quoting Lisa Prescott, was at UCSB for 40 years. And she says, I don't feel our office can handle seeing test scores. It's going to put such a bias into our minds. We're going to end up putting too much weight on it. That's my opinion. But I also understand the need for confirmations that, and I do agree that when you see extreme performances on the low side for a highly rigorous program, that is troublesome and is going to be correlated with lower grades and higher dropout rates when it's quite low. So that's my approach. And that's what I think this can grow, but I'm not, even as quixotic as I tend to be, I'm not under the illusion that this is ever going to be anything that would be adopted at wide scale. But I do think there's potential for some schools trying it, and I do think there's room for more creativity in the space. All right. I shouldn't just summarily dismiss what Barbara's suggestions without telling you why I'm skeptical. So if you've been listening to our YouTube content, you know right now Bill Deresowitz is up, like author of Excellent Sheep. That's our long form video. Okay. And then the next one after that is going to be the second one with Bill. I interviewed him about his second book. Well, his most recent book, The End of Solitude. But the third long form video, and just in case you're confused, we go 5 short ones and a long one. So when I say the next one, it's, remember, we're not having episodes every day because we don't have them Monday and Thursday. So each time that's like about 10 days out. But it's an interview I just finished yesterday with Julie J. Park, distinguished scholar, professor at University of Maryland in the education department, author of 3 books on affirmative action, most recently Race, Class, and Affirmative Action. And she was a lead consultant to Harvard in the most recent Supreme Court cases. So I think you guys are going to find that fascinating. Anyway, why am I saying this? One of the things Julie says at the end when we're talking is it's incredibly hard when you take away a program to ever get it back. It's just incredibly hard. And I would agree with that. So that's one reason why I don't think you'll see a return to SAT 2 tests. But there are other reasons as well. The College Board themselves started moving towards AP, away from subject tests. Yes, COVID-19 was an accelerant for the demise. Subject tests have been gone now since January 2021. So we're talking 5.5 years. But there's already concern about that we're testing kids so much. And what about learning and teaching to the test? And there were so many different tests, those 20 plus subject tests. They all had to be individually managed. And if you actually looked at the numbers for the subject tests, and I used to manage those when I worked with Susan at Westtown. Administer, not manage, but I used to administer those tests. But those were declining. The number of people that were taking some of those subject tests, I was shocked when I saw how few people were taking some of the subject tests. So it's a lot to administer a program like that with all those tests, with so few people taking them. And we're already in some ways over testing kids all the time. There's certainly going to be a backlash there. So for many, many, many reasons, I don't see that. And I haven't even heard a single person ever say, let's bring subject tests back, like that I talk to ever in academia. I don't talk to everybody, of course, but I do feel I talked to enough people to know there is no groundswell movement for that. So that's why I don't see the subject tests coming back. Now, when it comes to the AP, there are a lot of reasons why I don't think that we would ever see a movement toward implementing the AP. For one, that's $100, probably more. It's $100 last time I checked to take that test. And I don't see College Board wanting to walk away from that money, but that creates an economic issue right away. That's one of the reasons why sometimes admission officers tell me if they're working with a kid in an under-resourced neighborhood and they don't see an AP exam, they don't judge and assume the student got a low score. It's like the kid might not have had $100 to take the test. And so there's already a lot of, I would even use the word rage toward the College Board for charging so much money, I mean, it's a ridiculous moneymaker. I've said on this podcast before, David Coleman, his salary, last time I checked was like $2.7 million. It's a lot of money to be bringing in for a nonprofit, because think how much money they make when they run SAT, ACT, APs. Like, there's not much cost for them. And College Board doesn't want to give that money up. There's backlash toward how much money they're charging already. And here's another problem with the AP. Remember, senior APs are not eligible to receive scores until July. So the whole entire senior year, there'd be no way to even know how a student did. A student could have 4 or 5 AP senior year, and you're going to put a big emphasis on them. You have no idea how they did until they've already matriculated in college, or at least deposited. So I just don't see that happening, for that reason. And there's just been a lot of controversy around AP. For one, a lot of people don't know this, but the College Board has been accused of making AP exams much easier to get a higher score on. Like, we hear all the talk about grade inflation. There's been score inflation when it comes to the AP. For example, a recent study found that the number of students scoring 3 or higher has climbed 20 in recent years. Okay, so there's backlash there. There's always going to be backlash about teaching to the test. And you're going to get that, by the way, with both the subject tests and the AP. Are you really truly doing critical thinking? You're going as deep as you could. One of the criticisms of the AP is it has a lot of breadth, but not a lot of depth. There's so much content that teachers just have to fly through that material. And sometimes, this is very true where I worked at Westtown, you had experts who wanted to go into real depth in their subject area, and they couldn't do that because they had to move at a breakneck speed. See how many independent schools have moved away from the AP. If anything, the momentum within private schools has been away from the AP, not toward the AP. So there's just a lot of reasons why I don't think it would ever fly to go with AP or subject tests. I appreciate, though, how you're always coming up with ideas and thinking and trying to see if we can come up with workable solutions. I think the best case scenario, what we can just likely expect, is that everybody will come up with their own system. I would love to see no harm spread and gain more popularity. I like my idea. The closest we've seen to that is Caltech. But when you look at Caltech, the numbers are so high, it almost loses its potency. Or maybe Tufts. Maybe Tufts is a good idea, closest to my idea, But I do think there's going to be more innovation in the space. I do think there'll be more creativity in the space. But I absolutely do not think we'll ever see a return going back to either subject tests that were dropped in January 2021 or AP exams. Barbara, appreciate you as always. And I look forward to seeing you over there on YouTube. I already saw you posted a comment on YouTube, and I'll look forward to interacting with you in our comment section over there. Keep sending in these questions. Thank you. All right, friends, I want to give you an update on YCBK Plus, which is about to come out this week. And we have several articles in there. I always like to give you a preview of the articles that we profile, things that we didn't get to on our podcast, but we think they're important. So there's an article about how UC is expediting their timeline to decide whether to restore SAT, ACT. There's an article about the House Education Committee advancing a bill to define sex as biological. There's an article on how far can the Supreme Court's rulings go when it comes to interfering with education. There's an article on how widespread student use of AI is in the classroom on a new poll. There's an article about NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang. I'm a big fan. He donated $75 million to the brand new Vanderbilt in San Francisco. So there's an article on that. And there's an article on something I'll be talking a lot more about. I think I'm going to do a YouTube video on this. But Virginia and Ohio join efforts to design 3-year bachelor degrees programs. Those 2 states combining efforts. And there's an article on how colleges are weighing limiting graduate loans amid litigation. And then finally, there's an article on how federal agencies are using keywords to see who's involved in diversity and to nix grants. And they're doing it en masse, and there's court records to show that. So if any of those articles are of interest to you, if you sign up for your College Bound Kid Plus, which you can sign up to just by going to our website, and you will see your College Bound Kid Plus on our website. When you go to our website, you'll see a tab called More. You just want to go to the More tab. And when you drop down, you'll see YCBK Plus, our brand new website. Check it out. So yeah, you can get the July edition if you sign up now. It's going out this week. Friends, we are in year 9 of our podcast, but July 21st, 2026 was the most important day of our podcast history. On July 21st, we launched a brand new YourCollegeBoundKid.com website. As soon as an episode goes live, you can now listen on YourCollegeBoundKid.com instantaneously. And as soon as a YouTube video goes live, it is up on the new website. The website is cleaner. Interviews and the spotlights and past episodes are so much easier to navigate. Special shout out to a brother-sister team, Mary LaChance in Connecticut and John Rooney in New York, who, by the way, are volunteering their services to help us make college knowledge available to all and being our webmasters. You have to check out the new YourCollegeBoundKid.com. The feedback so far on the new website has been off the charts. Effusive. Another thing happened on July 21st. We went from a Monday, Thursday, Audible podcast to a daily podcast. We now have YouTube videos that drop every Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. That is every day we don't have an Audible podcast. Most of these videos are between 10 to 20 minutes, but every 6 videos, a long-form video, a deep dive with a thought leader in admissions or higher ed. Our Your College Bound Kid podcast YouTube channel is more than just a place to learn. It's a community forum, and we can use that comment section on YouTube to interact with each other and strengthen our bonds in our community. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Stuck, you're killing me. I mean, I love the pod, but 7 days a week, are you serious? Thanks to Sony Patel from Kansas City, every one of those 5 days we drop a new YouTube video, she will send out a video trailer on Instagram that will preview the YouTube video that went live earlier that day. So you can take 60 seconds to watch the Instagram video trailer, and then you can decide if the 10 to 20 minute YouTube video is worth your time. Now, if you're not signed up for our Instagram, it's just at YCBK Podcast. That's at YCBK Podcast. One more time, that's at YCBK Podcast. We are excited and we look forward to interacting with you, our listening family, in the comment section on YouTube. Friends, without any further ado, let's transition to Jed Applerouth, part 2 of 3, as he talks about questions you sent in on the ACT and the SAT.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, friends, we reached part 2 of Jed Applerouth answering questions, about 5 of them that listeners sent in about the SAT and the ACT. So in part 2, Jed talks about the return to required standardized testing. Jed talks about grade inflation. Jed answers a question from a listener who wants to know what Jed thinks about the classical learning test. Jed answers a question from a listener about whether to submit scores. Jed answers a question about why some colleges require all scores. Hope you enjoy part 2 of 3. Listen and enjoy.
I like the idea of having a threshold, having a floor.
Yeah.
But a kid, if you can't get a 1200 on the SAT, well, you're probably going to have a hard time at MIT.
Sure.
So I'm very much open to having some kind of a, there's a hurdle, and after even like number of APs, that the strength of prediction after 5 becomes net 0 essentially. So kids having 13 APs versus having 8, no difference in terms of their GPAs in college. And so, but, I need to see a certain level, because, there is a difference between a kid with 1 AP and in like 5. And so, I don't know.
The reason why I like that is, I have this saying, our listeners have heard me say this a lot, that numbers do voodoo on the brain. And it's the same thing for rankings, too. If somebody sees a school, the school's ranked 4th and this school's ranked 14th, they can't get it out of their head. It has to be better. And it may not be a better school at all for you. But now it's so programmed in your brain. And I find even that, I'm in my 26th year, I still find like these numbers impact me. Like I'm thinking of a student I'm working with now. And so the first time she took the SAT, she got a 1220.
Okay.
She had very aspirational schools that she was interested in, brother at an Ivy League school, this kind of thing. And I'm immediately sort of thinking, well, we probably need to reframe some of your expectations. And you sort of have a tendency to see somebody in a tier sometimes in your brain. Well, she has a 35 ACT right now.
Amazing. Amazing.
Now that's a case where the score then came up, but it kind of can mess with your mind a little bit when you see a certain score, especially if it's an extreme.
Yeah.
and it's hard sometimes so I'm sure you've seen like Tufts is now saying, send your 1300. We
Yes.
want your 1300.
We want that 1300. Yeah.
And that to me is kind of moving somewhat in that direction. Maybe our research shows that 1300 is going to be perfectly fine here. It's getting away from that don't send your 32, 33
Right.
because, the middle score is 34, 35. So it takes away some of that frenzy. But I actually prefer sort of the don't send it at all if you hit this threshold. Check a box to say you hit it. And then we're going to collect scores at the end and do our own internal data. Like I think that removes the test score bias on the part of the reader, still lets the school do some institutional research. I mean, Caltech's done something like that. It's just Caltech. So like 780 to 800 gets an A, and then 750 to 770 gets a B, and then, and then I think other than that, I think they actually see the real score if you're, but they don't want to see it. Like they go test. They don't want to know your score if you're 780 to 80. They just find out it's an A or a B. And so they're,
yes.
I mean, it's a narrow bandwidth there, but probably 80% of their kids have 800 maths. They may be higher. So, for them.
And I really do like that. Also, the schools that have a do no harm policy, I like that. It takes away some of the stress, some of the frenzy.
Yeah.
And kids getting credit. Because I really don't think, what I like with Tufts, with their number they picked, it has to be derived from institutional data. I'm sure they ran the regression.
Yes.
They found that this is okay. Beyond this, it isn't adding as much, but it send it up. So if you got a 1200, those kids don't do as well, or whatever the number is. But I like the bigger distinctions versus the micro, the minor, those nuances. And just understanding how the tests are created and how they're scored, realizing these differences people quibble over. It's one or two questions can swing it like 30, 40, which is not an indication of your ability or intelligence at all. It's on a given day.
Sure.
You guess right or wrong. But a 1500 is different than 1100. Mm-hmm. And even to your point, when you bucket kids in your head, when I talk to certain kids, in my mind, I might imagine the score they would get based on their fluency, their speed, their vocabulary, just from having worked with 1,000 kids,
Sure.
We definitely do in our minds have mental models of the perfect scoring student.
And sometimes I'll have a kid with a lower test score, and this happened a lot more in COVID, but they would get into a very highly selective school. And I'd be a little surprised by that.
Yeah.
But it's because I knew they were 26, which is a good score in the scheme of national averages, but it's not for elite schools, right? So, and I'd be taken a little back. But then I thought, okay, well, the college never saw that.
Yes.
So they got to see everything but that. And then especially if they have higher APs, which helps really a lot.
And those are predictive. The APs in some ways are even more predictive.
Yeah.
For certain, the fit to major and getting fives in certain areas. Mm-hmm. So having standardized assessments, whether it's APs, IBs, there's value in those. And so, and I see colleges returning because they're discovering the value, and they find, and there's a permission structure. When enough schools like them have gone back, they're like, okay, well, we can too. And the drumbeat, against testing is kind of quieted. And even with the administration saying we actually like test scores again.
Sure. If anything, there's a pressure.
There's a pressure to return.
And especially when 7 of the 8 Ivies are now there, that puts a pressure on people that want to see themselves as Ivy peers or whatever.
Ivy quality, MIT and Stanford. It's okay, these schools, Carnegie Mellon, so many engineering schools, so many of the top schools in the country are test required. So being part of that, we're in that group,
Yeah, there's some pressure there. Yeah, but they also have a very different situation where they're staring at,
oh my God, the number of kids applying, it's ridiculous.
Number of kids applying, and the number of transcripts that have virtually maybe one grade under A minus, if that. Yeah. I heard a stat the other day, and this is actually, I've heard this for a few years now. UCLA had 33,000 4.0 unweighted.
It's insane
for 13,000 spots.
Right. Yeah, what do you do with that?
Almost 3-to-1 no A minuses of their 150,000 applications.
It's
now,
unreal.
for those who are listening, don't freak out. They'll take some kids.
Yeah.
They'll have some kids that they'll take that had a grade under A minus there for lots of different reasons, because they have how much you're going to add in other areas, and one grade under an A minus shouldn't knock you out of a pool.
When a B can keep, when you fail the class 3 times with kids with 4.0s. And it's the grading is just a different thing than it was when we were growing up. It's
Yeah, and the professors that I work with, they absolutely hate it because they really feel
oh,
you're not preparing kids for life with resilience and all kinds of other things. Yeah, we have several that listen who speak up and let us know what they think about this great inflation thing.
The lack of accountability and the lack of room for like real excellence and holding kids to a really high standard. And, when they feel like giving a kid a B might knock them out of, school contention, which is so upsetting. When I can't give a student a B. That's terrible.
And I know of some schools where one B sent you to a separate committee.
Yeah, that's unreal.
Which is crazy.
I don't like that.
So let's take a few questions from our listeners. So this one's from an IEC, and he's noticing that the classical learning test is growing, and CLT. I'm hearing more and more and more about it as well.
Yeah, man.
And want to know just what are Jed's views on the classical learning test?
I have a hard time with the CLT, you can imagine. Just because of the lack of evidence-based. And, and
why don't you explain it to our listeners who may not know?
Right. So it's a college entrance exam geared towards 11th, 12th graders, about $70. And it's being accepted now, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Florida. It's growing in popularity, but like the Iowa Board of Regents, they ran a review and they found, quote, no evidence to support the predictive efficacy of the CLT. And they recommended it not be used as a criterion for admission to Iowa schools. And ultimately, that's, my degree is educational psychology and, psychometrics and understanding how tests are created and conducted, how they're normed. And they're putting out these tables, which the College Board is saying, these aren't accurate. These two scores between the CLT score and the SAT, they're not comparable. And they haven't done the rigorous, with the SAT, ACT, that they have 3/4 of a million kids. They sit down, they run both tests. And they also, and all the colleges, they're running their institutional data. They're running regression between the SAT score and freshman year GPA and four-year GPA. There's research. The CLT was a response to, too much diversity, too much woke. And let's go back to Aristotle and Plato and the canon, the classical canon. And the original College Board test in 1926, it was based on the old canon. It was based on the schools, the Exeters and Andovers getting kids into Harvard and the Ivies. That was the old test. But they've shifted, and now they're trying to be more inclusive with different authors, different topics. But the return to the classic, predominantly, white Anglo-Saxon canon, the classical foundational literature and Shakespeare and other things. I see what they're trying to do, but if they didn't put in the sweat to actually norm it and show the validity and the strength of prediction, that to me is a tremendous weakness. Mm-hmm. And so there's a question of, how will elite colleges look at this? We're seeing some big state schools who are pushing back against, the quote woke agenda, whatever it is, and saying, well, we're going for the CLT. But would I rather, a lot of the top schools in the country are not accepting the CLT. Mm-hmm. But, out in the Midwest or Florida, other places, it's being embraced. The academies now with, heads at the administration, they're pushing towards the CLT. So it's gaining traction and gaining currency. But there are real questions about, is it actually valid in terms of, face validity, in terms of the validity to predict performance. And that's something where I think a lot of the more research-based colleges are going to push back until maybe they might run their own data, but many of them really aren't embracing the CLT. Unless, they're forced to by some power. They're like, we have the SAT, which has 100 years of data. We have the ACT built in late 50s. These are research-based and they're proven, and we can see the correlations, and we run our own internal correlations. We know internally how they predict, but the CLT is a bit of a wild card. So we're getting some requests because we do like county deals in Florida with the SAT, and there's some requests. Can you teach the CLT? And it's like, okay, there's a marketplace for this for some of our kids, but we haven't built out a curriculum. We haven't put in the energy and it's going to be based on the reading skills we've done for 25 years for the SAT. We'll modify it and bring it over. But in terms of, is it really that much of an innovation versus it's kind of just going back towards more conventional canon of literature and character and ethics of the old, Anglo-Saxon white Christian. And that's kind of the idea behind it. But I don't know. I've never taken it that seriously, but maybe I'm going to have to if it keeps gaining favor. The Republicans are pushing it in a huge way, like the American Enterprise Institute, all these things. Before it was small Christian liberal arts, but now it is expanding more to the state schools and the academies. But I don't know. We'll see if it keeps growing, and it probably might. But it might be this administration, it might be the political swing, but it might swing back. But I still am more of a believer in the SAT and the College Board and the ACT.
Sure.
So they're researchers and they have psychometricians. They're more serious about these tests, I think.
That's good. Thanks, Jed. Very helpful. All right, friends, we had a question that came in, an audio question. We're going to play the question. It has to do with super scoring and whether to submit all your scores or not, and a few other nuances there. But I'll play it, and we'll get Jed's expertise.
Hi. Thank you so much for being willing to take on listeners' questions. My colleague at work used you as their college counselor for their daughter with great success and turned me onto your podcast, which I have been listening to religiously for the past year. I currently have a junior going through the process for college, and the question I have has to do with your upcoming podcast on the ACT. This question gets posted a lot in my parent Facebook groups, and the answers vary dramatically. And so I thought I'd come straight to the source. So my daughter recently took the ACT a few times, and on one of the tests received a 35 in reading, English, and science, and a 32 in math for a composite of a 34. So she decided to retake this ACT again and did improve her math to a 34, but then her other areas dropped. So she has a super score of a 35, but she's worried about sending in multiple ACTs that show varying scores in the various subject areas. So the question is, should she just send in an ACT showing her best score, or should she show her composite of a super score, which really is only affecting one subject area? This also is a question about Georgetown, where you have to send in all of your scores. Do colleges view the varying scores negatively? Do they look at your lowest scores? Do they only look at your highest scores? And how does that affect how colleges perceive you if you're sending in multiple ACTs with various scores? I believe her composite ranges from a 32 on one test all the way to a 34. And so the super score of 35 is great, but maybe not so much if they can see that she got a 30 one time in one area versus a 35 in another. Thank you so much. Not sure what the right answer is, but would love to see how colleges view these varying test dates and various scores in the different subject areas.
What do you say, Jed?
All right. So in response to that question, the key is the super score really it reigns supreme. And you want to send in the 34, and with that second test, there was a lower, and math went up to a 34, bring the composite to a 35. Make sure they see both those tests. They're going to give you credit for that. They're not going to penalize you the fact that science reading went down. What they want to see is, like, and in committee, very often all they look at is the super score, and they're not going into that. They go so fast through applications, and it's not going to hurt you. They're not going to penalize you. The fact that you scored a 35, that's what they get to publish on their freshman profile. So that's the score they're going to use, and that's what they want to see. You have a 35. They're not going to ding you because reading went down. So I would definitely never withhold that score, because that 34 on math brings you up to a 35, and that's the number that'll get you into Georgetown. And so even though they want to see, and almost no schools in the country want to see everything, but many of them, again, they're going to pick out their scores, make a super score, and that's the number they use in committee.
Thank you. Sometimes I do get the question, why are schools asking for all my scores? Which, there's still a small number of schools that do that,
Very small number of schools. Yeah.
And why are they doing it? And what should I know about why they do it? What would you say to that?
Part of it is to make sure they actually do get the data they want. Because some people, may not submit, they may withhold. They want to see, all the scores. They're going to create the score they're going to use in committee. And so they're going to pull it together, and a person may make a mistake in terms of what they include or exclude. But almost no one now, it's not to penalize you per se, it's to make sure they have the data they need to use in committee to actually build, that profile for you.
All right, friends, that concludes part 2 of 3. I hope you join us next week for part 3 of 3 with Jed Applerouth answering questions you sent in about the SAT and the ACT. And friends, on Thursday's episode, we'll have another question from a listener, and we'll have the final part of Jed Applerouth's interview. Parents asking questions about the SAT and the ACT. And friends, one of the biggest myths out there is just because a college is harder to get into, it makes it a better school. Selectivity is important, but it's not everything. It's one thing. It's not everything. And never forget, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what's going to determine your level of career success. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about YCBK on social media, and you help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating at yourcollegeboundkid.com and clicking the donate button. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. If you have a question or suggestion, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak, and we will do our best to get your question or your comment in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I'm the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admission and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-host, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, 2 admission officers from Colorado, Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Kate Strickland from CU Boulder, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, Heath Einstein, the Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU in Fort Worth, Carter DeLauro, a co-director of college counseling in New York, and Christina Lopez, the former Dean of Admission at Barnard College, and our international college specialist, Kevin Newton from Dallas, Texas. Our stupendous sound engineer who makes everything happen is Nemanja Matvic from Serbia. Our reliable webmaster is John Rooney. Website updates are done by Joy Stucker. Image editing by Vlad Honchar. And what would we do without our volunteers? Guy Pillsbury, Sony Patel, and Andy Bernstein are all helping us with podcast marketing. Carolyn Wood, Mark Doniger, and Carrie Roberts book interviews with thought leaders. Amanda Dugan, Colleen Sinoki, Nicole Resch, Trevor Smith, Ryan Stepler, and Lynn Labash send thank yous to interviewees. If you want a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly newsletter, YCBK Plus, it's also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights and our upcoming events and receptions. And you can now do searches for past content by using our new Explore and Topics tabs. We really encourage you to explore our past content. We have close to 1,000 hours. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.